This video is sponsored by Brilliant.org. These are black lion tamarins from the Atlantic rainforest of Brazil, and they are on the verge of extinction. But some people are fighting to change that. Lots of people follow this YouTube channel because of the vlogs I made during my PhD in atmospheric physics at the University of Exeter. Unfortunately, however, I had to graduate at some point, and that necessarily meant the end of my videos showing what doing a PhD was like. However, there are lots of people out there doing interesting PhD projects, and so in this video series, I'm spending a few days with a new researcher each episode, showing you what their life is like, learning a bit about them, and learning about the topic of their thesis. This time is rather different. Normally in this series, I go somewhere and talk to someone in the middle of their PhD, but this time I'm speaking to Lisa, who is hoping to start her project soon. The reason I'm speaking to Lisa is because last summer I was on the island of Jersey speaking at the literary festival about my book Firmament, and I had an afternoon spare, so I went to maybe my favourite place in the entire world, Jersey Zoo. Now, if I asked you to think of a zoo, you'd probably think of a place with lions and elephants that people go to with their kids to gawk at the animals and maybe throw peanuts. Jersey Zoo is very different to that, and a lot of that comes down to its founder.
So Durrell was an amazing man. I'm sure most people know a lot about his history because he's been on TV, both in person and in fiction. So just someone who was really fascinated by the natural world from childhood, grew up to become a collector of animals for zoos, and through that became very much aware of the problems that are facing animals and plants worldwide because of human behavior. And so he then developed his vision for a zoo that supported conservation as its main goal, rather than a zoo for entertaining people.
As he documented in a famous series of books, Gerald Durrell saw species disappearing around the world over his lifetime. But unfortunately, the number of species at risk of extinction has only increased over time. Currently, 28% of all species assessed by the IUCN are threatened with extinction, though that percentage varies hugely depending on what class of plant or animal you're looking at. Why are so many species disappearing? Unfortunately, because of us.
Unfortunately, most of them are human impacts on their environments. The big one is climate change, and that's becoming more and more obvious in areas of the world in which we work and in other areas as well. It's affecting their habitat, it's affecting the resources that are available to them. Forests are being cut for fuel or to clear land for agriculture or for livestock farming. Then where we work in Madagascar and Lakalotra, the marshes are being cleared for fishing. The follow-on impacts of things like that are things like soil erosion. We're having impacts in terms of the noise that we make and the pollution that we cause. All these things are having huge impacts. There are very few species that are completely unaffected by human activity.
Fortunately, not all human impacts on wildlife are negative, and some humans, like Gerald Durrell and like Elined, are working to prevent species from going extinct. This is something done in the wild, what you probably think of when you think of conservation, things like protecting gorilla or rhino reserves, but it's also done in captive populations through research.
Our chief scientist, Carl Jones, likes to call it the interface between the wild and captivity. I feel now that it's becoming more and more relevant, simply because the human impacts now are so widespread for so many species that we are going to be managing them in the wild as well as we are in captivity.
Durrell engages in two kinds of activities with species such as the tamarins. Firstly, building up a breeding population in captivity, a safety net in case something goes wrong in the wild, and informing conservation activities in situ, in this case meaning in Brazil, with the captive population. And this is where Lisa comes in.
So I'm Lisa and I am a zoo research intern. So I've been working here since February of this year. So I'm working on the black line tamarin nestbox project. I did my master's research here last year, so this is like testing up to my PhD that will hopefully start next year. My undergraduate was in conservation biology. It was quite a nice and broad course, so it covered a lot of different aspects of whether you were doing lab work, looking at different genetic aspects, or whether it was field work. We did a couple of field trips. And then I did my master's at Nottingham, which was endangered species recovery and conservation. Genetics is not necessarily my ballpark, so looking at behavioural studies and what you need to reintroduce animals into the wild. And then I came here to do my thesis research and obviously fell in love with working with the black line tamarins and decided that that was, it for me, so I started working with them. Zoo research is a big part of what they do at Durrell, so I was really keen to continue to work with them, so they gave me the opportunity to come back this year. Bits of study now to set me up for hopefully my PhD next year.
So black lion tamarins are endangered, and they're a species of primate, so a small monkey that comes from South America. As they're only found in Brazil, and they're found in the Atlantic rainforest area of Brazil. There are 4 different species of lion tamarins. It's a group called the calitrichids. It's all the little ones that you'll see in zoos when you go round, the little cute ones. So there's 1,600 approximately left in the wild. They're split among different forest fragments. The majority of them are in a forest called Morro do Diablo State Park. The rest of them are kind of separated out far enough away that they can't disperse and cross between the fragments easily. Because people have cut all the trees down between them, it's started to fragment the populations. The genetics starting to get a little bit more concentrated in those areas and not being able to cross between the fragments. Each family group will have a territory, and so when their offspring are needing to leave to go and find their own mates, there may not be anywhere to go and form a territory. If the offspring try to leave the fragmented forest areas, then they might get run over on roads, they might get predated. Basically, it's not a good outcome for them, and so they reach a carrying capacity and they can't continue to expand the population.
Okay, so this is the bit I've been really looking forward to. Now we're going in.
To try and overcome the problem of forest fragmentation, conservationists in Brazil have been planting tree corridors, narrow strips of trees that connect the forest fragments and allow tamarin populations to safely travel and intermingle. This sounds like an ideal solution, but a quirk of the tamarin's behaviour has made these corridors less successful than expected.
So one of the problems for the black lion tamarins is that they sleep in older trees that have tree holes because they've hollowed out when they get older. They are building lovely new tree corridors, but they're really young trees. So to make the corridors functional for them, they need nest boxes so that they have safe sleep sites and they have those areas that they want to use. So we're looking at not only how to put different modifications in the boxes, like a tunnel, because that makes it harder for predators to actually reach in and grab tamarins at night, which is one of the big problems. Looking at different materials that we can use. Some of the problems of the nest boxes, they've already trialled some out there with our partners. The wooden boxes, Africanized bees are starting to colonize them, so this is making them really humid. Obviously the tamarins aren't going to go anywhere near them when they've got bees in them. The new material we're using, which is ecoply, is a recycled compressed plastic. We've tested it on bees here and they really struggle to build up structures on the surface of it, which obviously they're probably quite different to the bees you'll find out in Brazil, but it's a nice start to be able to see that different materials might be more suitable than the plywood that they're using at the minute.
I should probably be doing something other than just kind of grinning like an idiot and being surrounded by tamarins, but it's a little bit overwhelming to be surrounded on all sides by these absolutely enchanting monkeys. But I'm sure there are lots of you watching who are thinking, these are cute monkeys and everything, but why should I care if one species of animal goes extinct in Brazil?
The key thing to try and remember is that no species lives in isolation. All species have a role to play in that web of relationships that is an ecosystem. If you lose one small monkey, that might not look too serious, but that monkey will probably disperse the seeds of several plants. It will be food for some of the other animals that are there. It has a role to play in preying on insects and so on. And so if we start thinking that it's okay to lose one, what we end up with is a non-functioning system. And that, of course, is terrible in itself, but it has huge implications for human beings. It affects water, it affects temperature, it affects, food availability, it affects all these things that we depend on to survive. We're tearing our life support system apart, and even one tiny little element of it could be crucial.
A lot of people look at animals as separate to us. I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we can live in harmony with them and not separate. And I think that dedicating my life to helping them live how they should live without our disturbance is the best thing that I could do. So
hopefully you agree then that conservation is important, but understand that it isn't just done in the wild. It's also done in captivity, although quite how much of a distinction there is between those two is kind of up for debate. And when it's performed in captivity, it's performed as any other kind of scientific research is. Lisa's work that will go towards her PhD, and the work done at Durrell in general, informs and will inform how conservation is done in the wild, and may determine whether this species of monkey survives or not. And there is so much more to learn.
There's lots of things that we want to look at, or that I'd like to look at in terms of behaviour, so being able to follow them out in Brazil and be able to monitor their behaviour, do personality assessments and see what groupings they have out there, because there's also research that shows there's a link between cortisol levels in tamarins and their susceptibility to diseases, and which has been a real big problem for some tamarins out there. They've been decimated by yellow fever. It's important to understand, if you can look at it in terms of a behaviour route, whether that would then help inform conservation strategies. Without people doing research, PhDs, masters, whatever it is, you don't end up learning all these new things. And I think it's very easy for people in so many aspects of life to say, we think we know everything, but you have to accept that you never will. And it's always constant learning. And I think that that's why it's so important for people to still be involved, to stay interested and keep working on things, because the more we learn, the more we can do to improve.
As we've seen in this series, research takes many forms, sometimes with immediate impacts, as in this case, and sometimes with expected impacts far in the future. And it can be performed in dedicated facilities, in abstract, in practice, or in the blurry region between theory and practice.
It's sometimes a battle to convince people that zoos do have this role in providing the evidence for conservation strategies and methods and developing those techniques. And I think I've been so happy with our recent work, particularly Lisa's studies on the nest boxes, because I think that that's such a clear example of what a zoo can do to directly influence the conservation of a species and a habitat. I think trying to do that more is my aim, and I'm hoping that zoos in general, which talk a lot about conservation nowadays, can start putting that into practice themselves.
Science is a process. To quote Massive Attack, it's a doing word. It's a process performed in labs and universities, but also in the wild and, as we've seen, in zoos. But you don't have to be a scientist in order to benefit from understanding the scientific process. If you work in a job, or you would like to work in a job that uses critical thinking, maths, or really any kind of analysis, then by studying concepts in science, you can improve your problem-solving skills. For example, let's say you shuffle a deck of 30 cards labelled 1 to 30 and draw a card. What's the probability that the number on your card is greater than 25 or less than 10? Now, if you immediately found yourself drawn to working out the answer to this question, then you're going to love Brilliant.org, who have kindly sponsored this video. This is an example problem from the course on probability by Brilliant, who offer interactive, beautifully illustrated courses on subjects in science, maths, and computer science at a variety of levels, from introductory, such as mathematical fundamentals, to intermediate, such as vector calculus. And while they have thousands of lessons, more are added every month. This isn't your traditional educational resource. Brilliant doesn't teach you to memorize formulae or equations, but instead to improve your scientific intuition, making you a better problem solver. And all this in bite-sized lessons that you can easily fit in gaps in your day by learning on your computer, phone, or tablet. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/Simon Clark, linked in the description. And the first 200 of you to do so will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. That's brilliant.org/Simon Clark, with thanks again to Brilliant for sponsoring this video and for being, as always, brilliant. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support Durrell's work saving species from going extinct, then what you can do is
Donate
to Durrell at their website. Link is down there in the description. And also, if you're visiting Jersey, go visit the zoo. Thanks to Lisa, Rachel, and Aluned for being so generous with their time and for allowing me to meet the tamarins in person. And thanks must also go to these lovely people on screen right now, who are my executive producers over on patreon.com/SimonOxFizz. If you would like to support the channel, then you can do so there. That just leaves me to say thank you again for watching. If you'd like to watch something else, then here's some recommendations. If you enjoyed this video, please do pop it a like, and I'll see you in the next one.